On a winter map, the river bends like a stiff ribbon, and along it, a narrow rail line tries to keep its color. The front is a wavering brushstroke rather than a wall, and beside it, the trunk route beats with a slow, dependable pulse. Cold takes something from both, but trains still come. Far behind the horizon, a clerk closes a ledger, a whistle rises, and a set of wagons begins its eastward run with a patient clatter that makes station windows tremble. Steel carries more than steel tonight. Sacks that smell faintly of flour, drums of fuel that thicken in the cold, crates of ammunition chalked in tidy numerals, and bundles of medical dressings sealed against damp. None of it matters until it arrives in the right order. Kitchens cannot cook fuel, guns cannot fire bread, aid posts cannot warm a locomotive. The promise of this journey is simple. If the order is found at the right node, a day at the front will feel bearable, and the line on the map will hold a little longer. A switching yard is the place where chance becomes sequence. It does not fight or command. It receives, sorts, and sends. An arriving train is rarely arranged for the city it serves. Wagons are uncoupled and rolled to tracks that share a purpose, and a small locomotive nudges them into sets that make sense for the roads beyond the fence. When daylight is long and the rails are dry, this looks like a habit. Minutes fold neatly into each other. The main line clears, and outbound cuts leave in time to become meals, warmth, or firepower before evening. Winter changes the texture. Switch points grow stubborn. Oil thickens. Snow settles over indicator rods, then settles again after it is brushed away. A lantern flame leans in the wind and refuses to stand straight. None of this is dramatic. It is friction measured in small motions, the kind that steals 5 minutes here, 10 there, until the ledger reads differently by dusk. This yard rests where the trunk line meets the city's shoulder, close enough to hear the river when the wind shifts, close enough to feel, now and then, the faint tremor of guns working on the far bank. Fire arrives here less as ruin than as doubt. A shell that falls near the fence makes men stop and check. Is the running rail sprung? Are the signal wires intact? Is the clock still on the side of safety? Each check is a minute set down and not picked up again. Short winter light makes those soft minutes very expensive. Complex moves belong to noon. Night grants only what can be done quietly and safely. Staffing things in ways maps cannot show. A repair team lingers over a cracked fish plate. A signalman fights a cough. A shunter swaps boots with a friend whose soles have split on the ice. Warmth becomes a ration like coal, used carefully and lost quickly, and tired hands write tomorrow's limits before midnight. So the quiet puzzle becomes clear. If trains reach the outskirts faithfully, why does hunger keep time inside the city? Because a wagon can be 10 meters from another and still be a day away from it. Coupling takes sequence. Sequence takes permission from a single iron tongue, and Frost is a stubborn negotiator. When a switch point hesitates, a plan pauses. When a plan pauses, the front learns to wait. No voice needs to shout. The clock makes the case in patient strokes. An army is rarely strangled by one blow. More often, it is held by a steady hand at a narrow place. Here, one node sets the day's length, and soon that hand will feel cold fire. Closer in, the yard stops being lines. On a map, it becomes footsteps on packed snow. A switchman lifts his lamp. The glass fogs. A yellow circle finds a waiting hand signal. Wagons settle with a low knock. Air bleeds from hoses. A shunter walks the couplings, palm to iron, testing what the eye cannot. Brake wheels turn a half, turn and back again. Everything that matters here moves at the pace of fingers, breath, and care, while the background keeps time with a distant thud that asks notice. The rail gleams where frost has been brushed away. Somewhere beyond the fence, a gun speaks once and then falls quiet. Under fire is not a flame. It is a question. Where does it land? On the map or on the fingers? A shell falls beyond the fence, and men pause. Steel can lie even when it looks straight. Rail can kink under ballast. A wire can hum with damage no one hears until the next move goes wrong. The lamp lowers. Someone kneels. A minute spent checking a bolt is a minute the main. Line holds its place in the queue, and a wagon of flour stays potential, not food. Snow makes the yard a softer shape and a harder job. Visibility shrinks to islands of light. Inside the office, the chalked board sweats under damp coats and open doors. Arrivals, departures, shunting plans, lines are written, smudged, written again. The plan is not a single order. It is a living pattern of choices that cost time. Not all tracks are equal. Some are level and free. Others carry a warning wedge. A few are gone, crumpled by craters and frozen into bowls. One ladder track is gone, folded by a hole that holds its own weather. How many minutes vanish with it? The answer is an afternoon, paid in small coins of time. Without that path, every consist that would have crossed there must run around the missing step, reversing, easing, testing brakes again, turning one clean motion into 3 careful ones. Each extra motion is a place where a mistake can hide. Errors creep like cold into boots. A pin missed, a signal late, a wagon nudged too far and walked back. No one is careless. The night presses, safety margins, the quiet space good days create, thin. With the snow, in summer there is time to check again, to let a wagon roll and listen to what the wheels say. Tonight the light is short, and the men work inside it as if it were a room that keeps shrinking. A gust clears the smoke. Sight extends. Then it returns and the whirl draws in. Someone coughs. Someone rubs warmth into stiff fingers. The lantern's glass clicks as a flake melts. Work continues, but not at the speed a timetable imagines when it is written at noon. A brake test is a small ceremony that cannot be hurried. Hoses meet, valves open, the faint hiss levels, a wheel turns, a hand feels the drag. Coupler checks are the same. Look, tug, listen for the dry little clink that says trust it. These are anchors of a safe yard and winter taxes each. The thud outside is not always closer, but it is always heard. They keep moving because the next depends on the last being sound, and a yard can survive many things except hurry. If one ladder is gone, the minutes vanish with it and take friends along. A clear track becomes crowded. The waiting man becomes a longer wait. A locomotive that should have pulled is trapped behind a wagon with nowhere to go. What was slack becomes tension. What was an option becomes constraint. Multiply that by a short day and careful night, and delay stops being an event and becomes the weather of the place. Time is the real casualty, and its loss will soon be counted in wagons per hour. Not stories. On this cold night, throughput begins. As a tidy word and becomes a clock you can hear. Think of a wagon's journey as a string of minutes. Arrival under a slowing whistle. Brakes settling, a hand signal returned, a coupler made certain by touch rather than sight. How many minutes? Live inside a single wagon's journey? You can count them, and the counting makes the day's shape. A yard that can safely receive, sort, and send 12 wagons each hour is not slow. It is honest about what fingers and steel can promise. 12 becomes 10 when a switch is stubborn. 10 becomes 8 when a repair runs long. Wagons per hour is only part of the picture. Trains per day depend on how many such hours can be worked at full attention. In summer you can stretch, in winter you ration light, daylight gives speed, night returns caution. The crew that sorts 12 wagons at noon may accept 6 at midnight from prudence. Fewer complex shunts, more checks where snow hides the faint gleam that warns of a flaw. Count usable hours, multiply by safe pace, subtract minutes lost to checks after each distant thud. What remains is the size of the day. To make it concrete, follow one wagon. It arrives coupled among strangers, arranged for a different town. Air hoses part. A brakeman walks beside the wheels, palmed iron listening for a scrape. Reclassification is a chalk mark and a place in a new line. Food toward kitchens, shells toward gun parks, fuel toward engines. Coupling again, a turn of a brake wheel, a hose seated, then a short haul to a siding that feeds the roads beyond the fence. Each handover purchases certainty with time. If one step stutters, an air hose stiff with frost, a pin that will not seat, a reluctant switch tongue, the whole string waits a little. If 10 minutes repeats 100 times, what does the front feel? It feels like a day shaved thin. Cues are not failure, they are pressure telling the truth. A main line must stay clear enough to accept the next arrival. When wagons pile inside the yard, the pile leans outward and the main becomes a place to stand. A blocked main is a blunt instrument. It says to pause trains miles away, wasting steam and minutes. Clearing sidings is hygiene. It keeps arteries open. When sidings are healthy, arrivals breathe in and out. When they clog, the system holds its breath. This is why small delays grow long shadows. A 10-minute check repeated across a day becomes a train that does not clear before dusk. Dusk becomes a night of slower work, and the backlog wakes beside you in the morning. From far away, it looks as though nothing happened. From close in, it sounds like careful hands doing the same motions with colder metal and shorter light. The front tastes like thinner portions, fewer hot meals, a repair done tomorrow instead of tonight. Shortages seldom announce themselves. They gather as the sense that the day is shortened while the needs have not. You do not need a grand failure to starve an army. You need friction at scale in one place everything must pass. A yard is that place, the throat between a promise and a bowl. When the counts tighten, wagons per hour, trains per day, the city measures the squeeze in small signs first and larger ones later. The lesson lands quietly. Throughput is minutes made useful or lost forever. We step back from this node next and see the wider table it feeds, the routes in and on before the deepest cold asks its hardest questions. First, note the baseline that once balanced trains, crews, coal, and light. It matters for what follows. What did okay feel like 1 week before it didn't? It sounded like a timetable that matched the daylight and a whistle that arrived when the ledger said it should. The map stayed tidy in pencil. 2 arrivals by mid-morning, 1 at noon, 1 before dusk. None of it was generous, but the shape held. Trains came with their breaths even. Locomotives tired but willing. Coal in a low mound replaced before worry took root. A day might ask for a few hundred tons and receive a little less, but close enough that kitchens planned menus instead of wishes. Wagons per hour rose with the sun and settled with it. When a coupling stuck, there was time to try again. When a lamp failed, another waited. The main line stayed clear because sidings were cleared by habit. The sound was work without strain. A clank, a breath, a call that stopped at the fence. Crew shifts passed like hands on a clock. Dawn brought the first team to open points and check rods. Noon saw a smaller crew steady through warm light. Evening handed the yard to a night team that moved less but safely, preparing clean departures. For morning, locomotives were not young. Grates leaked, bearings wanted grease, paint wore thin, but the ready board kept more engines listed than crossed out. A warm shed and a small team of fitters returned machines each week. Coal arrived, in careful portions, rationed but present. The office was cooler than men liked, yet never cold enough to blunt pencils. The yard handled mixed loads by habit. Ammunition took the cleanest tracks. Food waited its turn on a spur sheltered from weather. Fuel moved with caution. Medical. Stores sat near the road gate so a truck could load and go. A morning train might be stripped and reassembled by early afternoon, its parts sorted into sets that matched the roads beyond the fence. A second could clear the main before dusk, leaving the night to housekeeping. Targets were understood rather than spoken. If the board showed so many wagons by noon and so many by sundown, the day was kept. Results hovered near those marks often enough that men trusted them. Shortfalls were made up by a quiet hour after supper. Maintenance kept its rhythm. After the meal, a crew visited old aches by name, a stubborn tongue at the north ladder, a low joint that drank ballast, a relay that sulked when damp. These were chores, not alarms. A spanner rang, a wedge was tapped, and a small problem went. Back to sleep. The night respected darkness. Between midnight and dawn came housekeeping, lining up outbound cuts, checking brakes by ear, walking the fence after frost. If a shell fell far away, the lamp lowered, a pause settled, then work resumed. Readiness felt like a pillow with just enough stuffing. There were spare lamps and gloves, a spare man borrowed from repair when a shunter needed help. The coal mound did not look rich, but it did not frighten anyone. Trucks arrived often enough that the pile recovered its shape. Engines failed in ordinary ways and returned in ordinary time. The ready board sagged and then steadied. Arrivals, capacity, and light stayed in balance. A missed hour in the morning could be found in the evening. Kitchens expected bread by a bell. Workshops expected a crate of parts before a repair. The yard delivered often enough that trust replaced worry. This was the edge of adequacy. The numbers worked when the day behaved. It felt like breathing through a narrow throat that stayed open. If a system is barely balanced, how heavy is a single cold night? The question had not yet entered, though the season waited outside, tapping its knuckles on the wood. The balance felt temporary. If the bridge coughs, does the chest or the throat fail first? The answer begins far from the city, where the trunk line leaves safer ground and runs toward winter. We trace an imaginary train from a staging yard where steam hangs in sheets. The consist is a mixed promise. Flour, shells, fuel, bandages, signals tip. The train takes the main pace that keeps coal honest and content. Bridges make that possible. Each span is a narrow sentence the train must speak without a stutter. In winter, the words grow brittle. A blown plank does not drop a locomotive into the river, but it slows inspection crews and softens the timetable. Junctions do quieter work. A diamond looks indulgent in summer and fragile in snow. Spare capacity is a kindness few notice until it is gone. When a nearby line diverts, the cushion absorbs the flow. When it cannot, waiting stretches along the verges like a second track. Our train reaches the city's shoulder and eases into the sorting yard, where promise becomes patience. Here, the route begins. Wagons that moved as a family split into errands. Food toward kitchens, shells toward gun parks, fuel toward engines, medical toward aid posts. None of these paths are long. All are sensitive. Spurs reach like fingers into neighborhoods of work. A cracked rail can stop a day's meals or a morning's cartridges. Crossings matter too. Some contested by fire, some by traffic, some by ice that makes a guard lift a gate with both hands. Beyond the fence, the roads tell the same story at another scale. A truck noses through drifts and loses minutes it cannot give back. Break the bridge and the chest heaves. Break the spur and the throat tightens. Even a working yard keeps time to threads it does not own. If inspection takes longer upriver, departures leave later. If the junction crowds with detours, arrivals clump and strain the sidings. Queues inside the fence often mean the world outside moved its weight and bent the hours. We follow one wagon of flour. Uncoupled, reclassified, recoupled, a small engine shoulders it toward a spur that feeds a bakery quarter. Ahead, a repair crew kneels by a split plate. The spur is open, but slow. The wagon waits as safety earns. It's minutes, then rolls again. By dusk, it is at a road gate. A truck takes the load. The road is passable, not friendly. Snow kisses the hubs. At a narrow crossing, a farm cart has lost a wheel. A policeman waves the truck around. Two men lift the cart aside. The evening batch shrinks. Meanwhile, a flat car of shells waits for a different clearance. The spur toward the gun park is watched and offers only short windows. The yard schedules the move for a sliver of light. If a raid elsewhere changes priorities, the window closes and the wagon idles. Still late. How many quiet threads tie a wagon to a soldier's bowl? More than the map can show. Signals, bridges, junctions, spurs, roads, crossings, and the prudence of strangers who make space. Each thread holds the next. Inside the office, the chalkboard records these shifts. An arrival pushed upstream becomes a departure moved to tomorrow. A minor bridge delay becomes a cue that asks for a second engine to keep the main clear. The yard is the middle, not the master. It arranges what it receives and sends and pays the cost when other hands pause. This is not a drama. It is steps. A train keeps its promise, a bridge coughs, a junction breathes shallowly, a spur hesitates, a road remembers winter. The result is not a headline, only a day drawn tight. Even a good node cannot outrun the threads beyond its fence. Slightly. If everything matters, what does first cost? We open a ledger and write 5 quiet words. Ammunition, food, fuel, medical, winter gear. On most days, all move. On tight days, the order decides the city's night. Priorities arrive as paper from a desk that sees farther than a fence. Arithmetic. Today, the paper says ammunition, then food, then fuel. The yard translates that into tracks, couplings, and minutes. Ammunition takes the cleanest lanes and the firmest rules. A small engine nudges those wagons with measured pushes. Time concentrates there. Food waits on the easy spur. Fuel holds for the afternoon. The clock learns a new shape. Tomorrow the paper may say fuel first. Then hoses and pumps claim the center. Ammunition shifts right, and kitchens look toward evening to make up numbers. The price of the sequence is paid by what waits. Flour cools. Fuel thickens. A dressing meant for noon becomes one for dusk. The men who sign the orders know the front's needs. The men who shape the trains know the yard's limits. Between them runs a wire of trust that hums under winter load. The foreman chalks the plan. Hazardous left, hot loads clear. Food to the short spur, fuel to the pumps. Shunters memorize it in their boots. Brake tests keep their ceremony. Safety will not be rushed because words changed on the page. The cost of first falls on second and third, who still require the same careful hands. Trade-offs appear quietly. Although battery fires on time, but the kitchen thins the evening portion. Trucks leave the pumps prompt, but the maintenance shed burns less coal and a repair takes an extra hour. Winter gear is a special case. It does not fire or feed, but it protects both. When gloves and boots arrive late, tomorrow slows even if the lamps burn. Medical supplies are another. They do not wait well. The yard keeps them near the gate, and most days they move quickly. They can tilt when the board is crowded. Safe handling steals time and returns it as lives not lost. Ammunition. Moves on a straight track. Fuel is pumped only after checks. Food can be hurried a little. Priorities are not simply words. They are time pulled into new shapes. Minutes given to the first task are taken from somewhere else. When the day holds more needs than windows, queues lengthen. Flour wagons that should have left in daylight. Drums slower to pump in cold. Boots worn one night longer. The ledger shows movement. The kitchen shows consequence. Neither lies. Winter turns the page and asks again. Today's fuel first. Tomorrow's ammunition. The next day, food. Alone, each switch feels reasonable. Together, they hold only if gaps stay short. But gaps like to grow. A day stolen from food is repaid late. A day taken from fuel makes paying later harder. When a raid closes a window or a frozen point steals an hour, the arithmetic turns stern. In siege pressure, delay becomes danger. Not because anyone failed, but because need and care fell out of step. The foreman rubs chalk from his fingers at dusk and studies what remains. He sees not villains, but minutes that went where they had to. When heat and hunger both knock, which door opens? The answer shifts with weather and reports from the front. The ledger can be tidy and the night still short. A city is not fed on intentions. It is fed on wagons that leave on time. If everything matters, first costs whatever second gives. That is the quiet truth the yard lives with. The cues at dusk are warnings soft. Tomorrow they may be louder if the window of light narrows. From here, the slow strangulation appears as postponements that teach the day to end hunger. For now, winter. Here's not a headline. It is a substance that clings to iron and skin. Frost feathers the rails and stays even after boots and wheels brush it aside. The couplers breathe a thin white fog when hoses are cracked, and that breath turns to glaze around gaskets that would seal in kinder months. Snow gathers over the points, soft to the eye, heavy to the hand, masking the slender tongue that must slide clean for the next decision to make sense. A switch that moved with 2 fingers in autumn asks for shoulders in January and still answers slowly. How long does it take to thaw a single decision? As long as a man spends chipping along a rod, and then a little longer for doubt to soften. The yard learns patience because metal demands it. The crew walks with lamps cupped against the wind. Glass rims blur with frost where breath meets cold. A shunter kneels and taps a bar along a rod to hear whether ice or iron answers him. Gloved fingers turn a brake wheel and feel only part of the message. Bare hands would read it better, but surrender their own heat to do so. Oil that flowed last week has thickened to a syrup that grudges movement. The first squeeze of a brake? Test drags unevenly, then loosens. Then drags again as chilled seals wake. Someone rubs a palm across a coupler face and leaves a darker arc where warmth lingers for a second and is gone. If metal hardens, does planning soften with it? Not here. Plans bend to accommodate the pace of steel. They do not go slack. They clear and signal in extra steps that look small alone and long together. A man brushes snow from a target, and then from the same target 5 minutes later. Another walks back to check a coupler he already trusted because a guest shifted the wagon and raised a doubt. Safety lives in these repetitions. The yard's rules are not suggestions to bend with weather. They are the only way to move without harm. Hands, lanterns, brakes, and clamped steel set the speed, not orders. Lost seconds become lost hours in a place that repeats itself. 10 careful pauses in the morning are a missed window at noon. The noon that vanishes pushes complex work into the dark, where each gesture slows further to avoid an accident that would cost the week. The clock above it keeps the same pace it kept in summer, which is a kind of cruelty and a kind of anchor. On the board, arrivals are still written in chalk, tidy and hopeful. A coupler that would have closed with a gentle kiss now needs a firm push and a second push to be certain. A break that would have released with a sigh holds a heartbeat longer. None of this feels like defeat. It feels like winter, insisting on respect and time. The men give both because they know the opposite of slow is not fast. The opposite of slow is broken. When the set finally moves, the small engine answers with a note lower than yesterday's, the sound of cold steam and careful power. The wagons follow at a pace that keeps fingers safe and couplers honest. In the office, the clock's hands move as if indifferent to cold, but the day has already shortened in ways only the ledger will speak. By dusk, effort has brought safety, and safety has brought delay, and the yard accepts both as the price of working through the freeze. The men mark small changes with quiet notes on the board and in their bodies. Boots grow heavier with clinging snow. Shoulders ache from leaning on levers that once obeyed with ease. Between moves, they breathe into their hands and count to 5. Not for ritual, but to be certain the next turn will hold. The clock agrees with none of it. Work prefers daylight, and winter gives little. The yard learns to stack its hardest choices. Where the sun is kindest, then live carefully when it fades. Sunrise does not start the day so much as open a narrow gate. The first hour belongs to inspections that must be seen, not guessed. Points checked, rods freed, targets cleared, rails walked. By mid-morning, the plan expects its best rhythm. Complex shunts that require long sight lines and crisp signals are placed here. How many decisions fit between sunrise and the next barrage? As many as prudence will allow, and no more. Light is rationed like coal. If light is rationed, what work buys it? Anything that cannot be safely trusted to feel alone. Long runarounds, crossing moves over busy ladders, the composing of hazardous cuts, the threading of a reluctant engine through crowded sidings. Even in daylight, eyes compete with weather. Sun on snow throws glare that hides a hand signal. Drifting smoke turns noon into a dim room. The crewman pauses and waits for the wind to shift rather than pretend he knows. The clock hears that pause and records it, exact and indifferent. Night work is possible, but slower and circled by rules. Lamps are hooded. Voices carry less. Steps lengthen, so boots can read what eyes cannot. Air threat and artillery make a bright light of an announcement, so blackout orders keep the field low and private. A safe night move is one the crew could defend to themselves in the morning. That standard is strict and good. Shunting after dark becomes a series of short, well-understood gestures with extra checks layered in. We can plot the day as a simple bar of light and shadow. At first light, inspections and resets. After that, the heavy work of sorting, marrying wagons to purposes, clearing the main for the next arrival. Near noon, tasks that cannot be interrupted without waste. A brake test that must be read by eye. A ladder that must not be fouled while a fast consist glides past. Mid-afternoon, a second wave of moves shaped by what arrived late. Twilight, housekeeping, positioning for night, assembling the first cuts for morning departure so daylight will not be spent on preparation. Dark, the careful shorter motions that keep the plan alive until light can quicken it again. When a shell lands at noon, it steals more than minutes. It steals the best light. The shock is a pause. The check is a second pause. The repair is an hour spread across the rest of the day. A movement scheduled for bright conditions slips into the gray and must be simplified or postponed. The echo runs forward into night, where caution is already thick. The soft tyranny of the clock is that it keeps moving even when the yard cannot. Risk under observation shapes choices in ways that readers of maps may miss. On a clear day, the yard can be seen and lamps can be seen too, so lights drop and hand signals try to do more than they should. A crew will sometimes hold a move in daylight because the move is safer under the darker veil, even if it will be slower there. That trait is not inefficiency. It is survival arithmetic. By counting light honestly, the plan stops pretending. It places the right jobs in the right windows. Disruptions during daylight echo all night. But not every echo is loss. Some are warnings that protect the next day. A missed crossing today becomes a safer departure tomorrow. When the lamps finally lower, the quiet is not defeated. It is the yard taking care of its people and its cargo with care until the sun offers another narrow gate to push through. Coal heats locomotives and men, and winter asks for more of both. A shovelful into the firebox buys pressure and motion. A shovelful into a small stove buys fingers that feel and decide. What does a bowl of coal weigh when weighed in hours? It weighs whatever a job would cost if done in the cold and done again. Tomorrow because it failed tonight. Shortages thin schedules. A warmed shed returns a locomotive to life. A cold shed adds a day to repair. If heat is scarce, which machine gets the fire? Coal allocation begins at the engines, because without them nothing else moves, but it cannot end there. The pump house needs warmth, so valves keep their seal and lines do not burst. The small room where crews take tea and change gloves must not freeze, or the shift after midnight will move like a shadow of itself. Repair triage in the cold asks for humility. A frozen bolt surrenders to heat and time, not to anger. In the shed, a fitter warms a bearing cup with a lamp, turns it gently, and listens for the soft change in tone that means oil has found its path. He could push and be done sooner, and then be back tomorrow with a worse problem. The yard chooses patience because it cannot afford repetition. Fewer locomotives make fewer yard moves, and each missing movement multiplies small delays into larger ones. The main holds its breath while a smaller engine works twice as hard and still cannot grant the same margin. A queue that would have dissolved in the warm season now becomes the shape of the afternoon. A feedback loop settles in between fuel and throughput. The slower pace delivers less cargo, which means less coal arrives on time, which means the next day begins under the same cloud. Breaking the loop requires a gift from outside the day. A fresh wagon of fuel early, or a weather shift that gives time without taking heat. Until then, the yard breathes shallowly and makes the best of it. Downstream, mouths count the gap without knowing the reason. Depots receive fewer tins. Kitchens stretch the pot. The map of want belongs to the coal pile, whether anyone names it or not. Every ration upstream grows larger down the line, so the foreman walks the coal yard and counts. He changes a line on the board. A movement that would have pleased the timetable gives way to a movement that will keep hands safe. The yard still breathes, and it will ask the sun for help to catch the beat it kept so easily in summer. Artillery here is not a spectacle, but a pressure you feel in the pauses between motions. A thud arrives from somewhere you cannot see, and every hand in the yard finishes the step it is on and waits one breath longer than habit. How loud is a delay? It sounds like a lantern being lowered, a boot heel settling, the click of a valve not yet turned. Even a near miss has weight. Dust drifts from a beam. A chalk mark smears where a glove brushed the board. The work resumes, but softer, as if time itself had to be set gently back on its rails. The rounds do not fall constantly. They visit, leave, and return with no rhythm a foreman can write around. Crews follow a small drill that costs minutes, and by safety, pause, check, resume. A man walks the line to feel for a sprung rail with the flat of his palm. Another taps a fish plate and waits for the note to ring true. The signalman looks along the ladder for a tongue that failed to home fully. Each check is a coin spent from the day's purse. Spend enough, and the noon window shrinks until complex moves must be saved for tomorrow. One well-placed shell can close a ladder track and send the map into a squint. If a single ladder closes, where does the day go? It goes into reversals and runarounds, into short moves made twice, into careful crossings through the last safe throat. A crater in a siding is not simply a hole. It is a new rule that says no heavy wagons here, no long cuts there. The office chalks unsafe beside the track number and draws a neat circle on the diagram. That circle will sit until tools, men, and a stretch of quiet return together. Repairs are practical and slow. A team brings saws for damaged ties, jacks for misaligned rails, shovels to free the spill where ballast and snow have married into something stubborn. They pack fresh stone and tamp it with a rhythm that looks like breathing. Spikes go home. Under a measured hammer, a straight edge rides the rail and shows whether the line has learned to be true again. No one hurries the test. A rushed repair is a second break waiting for the wrong hour. While the work continues, the queue grows. Not angrily, just inevitably, engines idle. A brakeman leans on a wheel and listens to pressure equalize, then steps back because the signal hasn't come. Minutes stack like sleepers in a pile. The yard develops habits the way a hand learns a scar. After a fall of shells, people check. Not because they are ordered to, but because yesterday taught what missed checks cost. The habit trims the timetable by thin slices that add up by dusk. Capacity slips in quiet ways first. A track taken out of rotation for inspection steals options. With fewer places to send a cut, every next move competes harder. Crews accept to. Longer walks between tasks. The small engine idles where it would have flowed, and fuel turns from background into measure. Harassment cycles wear more than steel. They wear nerve. Morning begins brave. Afternoon becomes careful. Evening ends. Conservative. The board still shows arrivals on time, but departures tilt later. The gap between target and achieved starts as a finger's width and becomes a hand. No speech explains it. The math does. To hit a yard is to hit time. Not every shell must destroy. Some only have to make people look up, and in that lifted second the day gives away a piece of itself it will not win back. Across a week, seconds repeat until the ledger shows a deficit. Night brings visitors from the sky who are not precise, but are punctual in their own way. A scattered raid crosses the yard like a hand raking gravel. The bombs do not seek a single bullseye. They seek time. One falls short in soft ground, another walks past the fence. A third lands where sidings fork. By dawn, the soft ground is hard because craters freeze into bowls that hold ice and water and doubt. What does a crater erase besides Earth? It erases the straightest choice and makes a simple move into a longer one. Under blackout rules, the yard keeps its voice low and its light lower. Lamps wear hoods. Gloves whisper against iron. A crew kneels at the lip of a new bowl and feels the edge with a bar. The ballast here is mud mixed with stone, a surface that refuses to compact. Drainage has a say in winter. It speaks in slow repairs and heavy steps. The team places timber to bridge the wound and marks a limit. Light cuts only. Test the brakes after the crossing. Rules drawn in the dark tend to linger into day. Night raids have a pattern. Engines cut power and drift while the sky grumbles. After the last echo fades, the small routine begins. Rails are walked. Switch rods are checked for bends. Signal lines are lifted to see if they catch. Repairs under blackout are slow because hands must know what eyes cannot. A nut is turned and then turned back because the thread felt wrong the first time. No one scolds the caution. Tomorrow's work depends on it. Low voices count bolts, a bar tests a plate, a tamping tool packs cold stone. Bombing here is not decisive, it is disruptive. That distinction matters. A switching yard is a maze that forgets and learns. Move one. Wall and traffic finds another path, often a worse one. The small detour eats minutes no one budgeted for, and the minutes wake before the crews do. By morning, the board inside tells a different story in the same handwriting. Departure lines are rubbed out and written again, because what was safe at midnight is restricted at 9. A crater in a siding shifts weight onto another siding. Two moves that would have been parallel now must be serial. The main line feels the load and slows to let the yard breathe. A plan that was elegant becomes sturdy. Another way of saying slow. If a maze changes each night, how does memory help? It helps by teaching the habit of testing every turn. Crews remember not routes, but rules. Do not foul a ladder until the tongue is proved. Do not trust a plank that sounded wrong when you walked it. Do not rush a brake that stuck cold last time. Memory builds caution into muscle, and caution spends daylight at a steady rate. Replanning is a morning craft. The foreman studies the diagram, draws crosses in a circle, then adjusts the order of 3 cuts. He is not angry, he is practical. With the hour, the new path keeps the main clear but gives up speed. Noon arrives and the board has been erased twice. Each erasure is a thin tax on the day. The last jobs lean toward dusk and risk being pushed into the slower dark. Morale does not collapse under this pattern. It settles. People keep energy in reserve for changes they cannot see yet. Caution reshapes pace without a speech, and the yard moves inside that shape. Night raids were never meant to finish the place. They make it spend today paying for last night. The yard pays in minutes, the gentlest currency of all, and the one a city feels by supper time. Some damage does not return. A siding is written. Off with a quiet line on the board. A crossover spiked and tagged for a future that never comes. What is the price of a choice that can't be unmade? Here it is, minutes, meters, and touch. When a map loses lines, where do the minutes go? They flow the long way round. We mark permanent losses without anger. The yard accepts limits as men accept winter. Steady hands, adjusted plans. A siding near the pump house dies after a week of failures, so every fuel move travels farther to find a workable track. A crossover by the north ladder stays locked after the bed settles, stealing a shortcut from half the day's work. The diagram looks similar, but the paths it invites are fewer. Flexibility narrows into ruts. Lost options make each move compete. 2 tasks that once flowed in parallel now queue at a single throat. A small engine that once slipped through must wait for a full reversal and a signal that cannot be spared. Added distance means added coupling and braking, each with its careful ritual. A missed pin here, a sticky valve there, the arithmetic. Of where? Follow one wagon. It should have crossed at the missing point. Instead, it runs 300 extra meters to a farther turnout, then returns along a crowded siding to the same spot. 300 meters means 10 minutes at the careful winter pace, a brake test at each reversal, and a second look at a coupler. Multiply by a day's traffic and the week leans. Fatigue creeps in, gloves stay on longer, notes grow shorter. Risk grows where repetition multiplies touch. More couplings handled, more chances to miss the sound that says locked, to trust a hose that should be reseated. Supervisors do not lecture. They slow the pace to keep risk honest. Engines idle where they once rolled. Steam cools while the signal waits for space. The main line stretches its arrivals untold. The whole system spreads to accommodate a single stiff joint. Normalization arrives quietly. What felt temporary becomes how the day is drawn. A new shunting plan is copied and pinned up, and no one calls it a revision anymore. The dead siding becomes a place for spare rails. The locked crossover gathers adrift. People stop saying when it might return and begin saying how to live without it. Cataloging closures has dignity. The foreman reads the list in a level tone at the start of each shift. 3 sidings restricted, 1 crossover out, 1 ladder under watch. The words are simple, so no one mistakes them. No drama follows. Planning does. Lines route fragile loads along the best remaining ground. Fuel takes the path with the fewest reversals. Ammunition claims the straightest iron. Food absorbs detours. Time allows. Added distance appears on the ledger as idle minutes and extra shunting moves. In bodies as earlier ache. In engines as thicker soot. The yard's shape has stiffened, and the timetable stiffens with it. There is no single villain, only the slow math of accumulation. A week becoming a month, then a season, remembered by the path men took around a place that used to be a choice. The end, the wall map, and the ground agree. Some tracks don't come back in time to matter. The yard works inside that truth without complaint. Its people count added minutes and spend them carefully, because nothing cheaper remains. They take pride in soundness. What leaves the fence still arrives where it must, only later. Later, repeated, it becomes the shape of the campaign. When the diagram loses lines, minutes flow into detours, and detours teach everyone to live with less, until less is all there is. The order arrives in a warm room that smells of paper, coal dust, and wool. A clerk smooths a sheet, a pen moves, and priorities settle into lines. Ammunition first, then food, then fuel. The handwriting is clear and the intent is clean. Outside, the yard is colder, and the lines on that paper must be translated into metal and minutes. Can a signature melt ice on a switch? No, but it can tell a foreman which wagon waits while someone chips along a frozen rod. The staff map shows arrows that glide. The yard's diagram shows throats, ladders, and sidings that accept only so much in the short light. The foreman reads the list without ceremony and chooses tracks the way a careful mechanic chooses tools. Dangerous loads go to the straightest lanes. Short stops sit near the gate. Fuel moves toward the pumps that will need attention before noon. A small engine answers with a low note, careful not to waste steam while the signalman proves each point. What happens when the plan speaks faster than steel can move? The plan keeps speaking. The steel keeps its pace. Ammunition takes the first daylight. Food steps aside and counts in the evening. Fuel waits for a hose that warms too slowly in the air. There is no quarrel between rooms. Both sides face the same winter. Inside the fence, the translation takes form as couplers tested twice. Brake wheels turned, lamps dipped, targets brushed of new snow. The tidy column marked achieved will be shorter than the column marked required. And everyone knows the distance has nothing to do with will. A brave priority cannot widen a frozen throat, but it can set the order in which breath is used. Shells move first. A mixed cut is broken. Chalk marks remade. Wagons nudged until the hazardous set sits on sound iron with a clean runout. The main must be cleared on time or the next arrival will wait where it should not. While the locomotive eases the head of the set toward the throat, flour rests in a siding that will see less sun. Fuel cools a little in its drums, making a stronger case with each degree dropped. Time listens to no petition. Beyond the fence, a distant gun asks for speed. The yard answers with care. By midday, the chalkboard tells the story in a flat hand. 2 ammunition cuts have left. A third is half assembled. Food counted for morning becomes food counted for evening. Fuel begins its slow dance with hoses and valves, a task that cannot be hurried by need. The staff room's logic is sound. Keep the guns loud and the stomach steady. The yard's physics is sound as well. Do what can be done safely within the windows the day allows. Between them lies an arithmetic. No one can cheat. The physical choke points remain indifferent to paper. A frozen tongue demands minutes. A ladder under watch demands detours. A short day demands that something worthy wait. End-of-day tallies show the gap without flourishing. Departure sits smaller than arrived. A kitchen writes a thinner menu. A workshop keeps one lamp and lets another die. No villain stands in the doorway. The cold asked questions, and the yard answered as far as time and hands could carry an answer. Tomorrow, the order may read the same. Or place fuel first, or ask food to lead. Whatever the paper says, the gate will open to the same air, and the plan will meet the pace of steel. The night crew hangs its lamps to dry and studies the list for morning, already dividing the light it does not yet have. How do you feed a gun and a man at the same minute? The question does not accuse, it measures. On a day drawn tight by cold, and interruptions, ammunition wins the morning because a battery has a window and a promise to keep. The yard nudges the hazardous set into the straightest track, couples with care, and clears the main so the next arrival does not stand under a signal and waste steam. A cook hears the same whistle and crosses out a line on a menu, moving a pot. From noon to dusk. Side by side, the flows look honest. Shells gain daylight, bread borrows evening. Handling turns that honesty into time. Ammunition cannot be hurried without risk. Signals must be clear. Braking tested. Couplers proved twice. Routes kept straight. The pace is steady and exacting. Food can accept more bends and detours. But sacks still ask for safe footing, and trucks want roads that will not seize their axles with ice. Winter shortens what can be done between checks. If night fails, which breakfast is missing? The one that was planned on time and pushed into darkness that did not hold. We can weigh the day without noise. Morning. 2 ammunition cuts depart under a sky. Their movement the sum of many small certainties bought within minutes. A third set is staged, and held for a gap in observation. Food and medical loads wait on spurs that see few hands until the hands are free. Midday. A brief lull allows a short food run to the road gate, but the gatekeeper passes news of a road snag, and the truck holds for a quarter hour that will never return. Afternoon. The third ammunition set moves when a dull cloud veils the field. Safe enough to try. Evening. Food squeezes the day's leftovers, counting on lamps and care to make up what noon lost. It is here the winter answers back. A gust turns light snow into a sheet. Lamps are hooded further. A crew elects to keep everybody safe and defer the last food move to morning. No one scolds. If a wagon tips or a man slips, the cost cancels a week of plans. Men wake hungry because the risk ledger said, live to carry more tomorrow. The guns did not starve, they ate the day. The kitchen will make a thinner soup and promise warmth later. Trade-offs do not end at the fence. A tired battery that fires on time can cover a sector that would otherwise invite a probing attack. A tired man who eats late works slower. His boots feel heavier. His temper shortens at the 5th frozen pin. Both save lives differently. The arithmetic is grim and real. If ammunition moves first, kitchen's thin. If food moves first, guns go quiet. In summer, a yard can sometimes do both by evening. In winter, under pressure, you can do one well, one poorly, or two badly. By night's end, the ledger draws tomorrow. The foreman reorders the first hours to give the kitchen a clean run at dawn, then blocks a track for a quick ammunition layover that will feed a midday gap. The plan honors both needs in sequence because simultaneity has become expensive. Crews fold gloves near a stove and read the board with the calm of people who trust their caution. Outside, a wagon of flour waits with its frost intact. The men know its turn is first light if the field allows. They also know another report may shift the order by a page. The voices stay low, the lamps lower, and the handoff to morning is a promise without boast. We will try to give back the meal the night could not carry. If fuel is invisible, why does everything visible slow without it? Because fuel is the breath between steps. A gauge on a wall, a pump that thumps, a film of sheen on a hose in cold. Air. These quiet things decide how many wagons become motion and how many plans remain chalk. Safe handling in winter begins with warmth. Hoses that kink at 10 below are coiled near a stove. Gaskets are rubbed and checked. A man tests the nozzle with gloves on, and then with bare fingers, because touch hears trouble the eye cannot. Pumps hum poorly when the oil is thick, the rhythm stuttering before it finds itself again. A man listens with his head tilted, counting beats to judge the line. Cold argues between pulses. Hands wait. Viscosity is a word that feels heavy when the drum refuses to flow. Pumping rates drop as the thermometer sinks. A transfer that took 20 minutes last week can take 40 now, and the difference eats 2 other tasks if the board refuses to bow. The foreman writes a box around the pump lane and treats it as a station, not a shortcut. Trucks idle less, engines are started later and shut sooner, everything is arranged to save breath for the heaviest moves. Allocation is a ledger of quiet choices. Engines receive enough to keep the main clear and the small shunter honest, because without those, priorities do not matter. Trucks receive enough to fetch what the railhead cannot carry itself. Stoves receive enough to keep fingers and judgment alive, because speed without care is a false gift. Each ladle poured, here is a minute returned somewhere else. Each ladle withheld is a minute the day will not see. And the loop between fuel and throughput tightens easily. When deliveries lag, pumps work less. When pumps work less, departures fall. When departures fall, the next train arrives. To a crowd the yard cannot clear, and the crowd slows the truck that was meant to bring the coal that would have fed the pump. Breaking the circle asks for a gift from outside the hour. A wagon of fuel pulled ahead on the line, a patch of gentle weather that lets hands move faster without risk, a cleared bridge that brings a convoy early. How many wagons does one missing? Hose delay? More than the map suggests, because the hose sits at a hinge. If a pump stands idle for want of a sound line, an engine idles longer, a truck starts later, a stove cools sooner, and each of those delays has children. A repairman warms a stiff length near a stove, checks the coupling, and hands it over with a nod. The picture is simple when drawn, stubborn when lived. A pressure gauge fogs in cold breath. A gloved hand wipes it clean. The needle climbs, stutters, steadies. A valve opens. A hose thrums. The ledger moves one quiet line. If the gauge never climbs, the ledger fills with wishes. When fuel falls, short. Throughput falls short. When throughput falls short, every other priority becomes an argument made to a clock that does not listen. Tomorrow's plan adjusts to this invisible first. The foreman arranges a morning devoted to pumps and lanes, then stacks the day's other moves behind that breath. He asks for a short fuel train to ride early if the trunk allows, and promises to turn it quickly if it arrives. The men read the board and feel the sense of it in their shoulders. They have carried wagons farther on less, and they know sense beats pride. When the lamps dim, the pump line settles like a chest at rest, and the yard holds still long enough to keep its breath. For morning, wings do not begin in the sky. They begin on iron. The clean diagram is simple enough to hold when you are tired. Rail to yard to road to airfield apron to aircraft. Each arrow is time, and winter taxes every arrow. The train brings possibilities. The yard turns that possibility into groups that make sense for trucks. The road carries those groups to a waiting line beside a strip of cleared snow where crews in heavy coats watch the wind. The aircraft is the last handoff, not the first cause. How do wings wait on rails? They wait in the shape of empty slots on a flight board and in the small frustration of a loader whose hands are ready but idle. If the apron is ready but wagons aren't, what flies? Anything that can be made to fit without wasting a takeoff, which is to say, less than the plan wanted. The airlift is brave and limited. No one doubts the skill that holds a line in crosswind or finds a faint beacon in blown snow. But even perfect flying cannot repair a slow handoff upstream, a mistake. Wagon at dawn becomes a missing truck at 10, then a quiet gap on the tarmac at noon. Rail to road looks dull until you count the steps. A cut arrives at the yard. Hoses part, Couplers open, chalk decisions are made, and the set for the airfield is built deliberately. Crates that must be slung, drums that must be kept upright, boxes that travel better stacked a certain way. Trucks pull under a canopy where lamps smoke the air, ramps clatter. A corporal checks a list with a pencil and touches each crate as if counting by feel. The yard's work is to make the truck's hour count, because a truck that waits is an aircraft that waits in a different key. Timing at the airfield is a chain of windows. Crews can load fast, but only inside rules that keep hands, engines, and airframes safe. Certain loads belong to a certain aircraft. A mismatch is slower or impossible. Ammunition wants a cleared floor and a pattern respected. Fuel wants fear of sparks that no one ever sees. Food forgives more, but not everything. The diagram looks smooth in the staff room. On the ground, it is a sequence that cannot be shuffled without cost. The apron has its own rhythm. Engines cough awake. A chalk line on the tarmac marks where a wheel should stop. Men with wands breathe into scarves. And point. A checklist lives in the aircraft and is obeyed in the same calm tone every time. What cannot be obeyed is an absence. If the yard upstream cannot sort and send the right cargo at the right hour, the apron sits ready and wrong. A plane may go up with a partial load, or with the piece that was easy rather than the piece needed first. Those decisions are not careless. They are answers to wind, fuel, and time. Upstream, a foreman studies a board and knows why a slot will be missed. Downstream, a pilot never hears the story. He only feels a lightness where weight should be. Winter adds its own edits. Roads glaze. A single lorry stuck on a hill becomes a small parade of idling engines, and the apron watches a window slide by. A brake line splits in the cold, and the load that was perfect for the second aircraft becomes late and wrong for the third. A savvy loadmaster can shuffle some pain, but shuffling cannot create minutes. The myth says the air can replace iron. The reality is kinder and smaller. Air can bridge gaps, steady nerves, and deliver the one thing a day cannot do without. It cannot carry a winter front by itself. Even many aircraft cannot move the tonnage that rails move when rails breathe. The chain is only as fast as its slowest link, and in winter the slowest link is usually the yard. That truth is not an accusation, it is a map. You can still draw the clean arrows, just right minutes above them. When the yard's numbers sag, the apron's numbers thin, and the sky shows its patience by circling and waiting. The viewer does not need heroics here, only the sense of a chain doing its best, limited by the sober fact that wings, for all their reach, begin on iron today. We slow down at the apron, where trucks meet wind and chalk lines. The runway is a pale ribbon with darker seams where tires have written, and beside it, the loading lane sits like a patient stage. What color is waiting on a winter runway? It is the gray of breath in air and the dull black of rubber that has not moved yet. That the arm's wind keeps its quiet clock. Crews stand by their vehicles, collars high, watching for the signal that says, "Bring it now." The signal does not come because a wagon upstream came late, and a small delay has learned to walk. Here, the timeline is a calm heartbeat interrupted. Engines idle, then cut to save fuel, then idle again. A man knocks his boots together and listens to a distant aircraft turning downwind. This is not failure, it is waiting, which is the quiet shape of a choke point felt far away. If a queue slips by 10 minutes, where does warmth go? It goes into the air while trucks stand still and into joints that stiffen while hands hold their place on cold metal. A plane rolls up, stops on the chalk, opens its door, takes what fits its rules, and leaves on the mark. Different airframes mean different appetites and limits. Some swallow pallets through a high mouth. Some prefer hand-carried boxes. Ammunition asks for a cleared floor and a steady rhythm. Fuel insists on careful grounding and a ban on sparks that no one sees until it is too late. Food tolerates more types of movement but does not like bruises. Crews can do all of this quickly when the right cargo is present at the right time. When it is not, speed becomes a story told about yesterday. The transfer timing from yard to apron is a bridge of minutes that does not forgive missing planks. A truck that should arrive at 10 arrives at 12 because the set was broken and rebuilt for safety, because a hose refused to seal, because a switch tongue would not home and demanded a second try. At the apron, those reasons are invisible but not unreal. The queue stretches, then compresses in a flurry when two trucks arrive together, then stretches again. What matters to the aircraft is the slot, and slots expire like matches. A missed slot is more than an empty minute. It is a meal not eaten, or a shell not fired. Discipline tries to protect the day. The duty officer will not hold a plane too long for a load that is still on the road. He looks at weather, at fuel, at the next aircraft 5 minutes out, and makes a quiet choice that feels almost like courtesy. A plane leaves with a lightness it did not want. Another lands into a pause that should have been a handoff. None of this looks dramatic. It looks like people doing the right thing inside the wrong timing. Cumulative effects live in the ledger. 10 minutes lost in the yard repeats 10 times and becomes a truck missing one flight. One truck missing one flight becomes a kitchen short for the evening. The kitchen will be borrowed from tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives thinner. Minor slippages do not travel alone. They bring cousins. A truck that waited for one aircraft is not ready for the next. A loader who worked in a rush drops to a safer pace. Waiting is not nothing. It changes choices. A pilot who knows the apron is late will hold a little longer on approach and burn fuel he wished to save. A supervisor will reshuffle crews and accept that speed without safety is a false victory. Crew morale settles one notch lower, not as a complaint, but as an answer to cold and repetition. The numbers at dusk tell the story in their own flat way. Sorties flown close to plan, tonnage moved less than plan, the gap explained by lines that read, late arrival, late arrival, late arrival. The board at the field reflects it with its own marks. A departure swapped, a spare slot mined for a partial load, a note about road condition added in the margin. Between the two places runs a corridor of time that winter narrows by the hour. The remedy, when it comes, is modest and human. A wagon caught at dawn, a convoy waved through at a bridge, a burst of clear weather that lets 3 trucks wake the apron at once. Then the heartbeat looks regular again until the next small interruption asks for patience and the chain pays in minutes. We end with a truth that holds in any weather. Aircraft can lift courage and some cargo, but not the weight a winter front consumes. If the sky's brave, why does the ground still decide? Because the ground chooses how much reaches the apron sorted and on time. A pilot can keep a line through a crosswind. A crew can turn a machine in minutes, but they cannot conjure the wagon that missed its dawn. We hold the picture of that single wagon, stalled by a stiff switch, arriving when the perfect slot has passed. The pilot never knows its story. He only feels lightness where weight should be. How many footsteps sit inside 1 ton? A day's work of men and women who touch wood, iron, hose, paper, and pedals until the ton becomes a thing that flies. A good rail day moves many hundreds of tons along steel that accepts weight without complaint. A heroic flying day moves far less, parceled into careful loads that protect machines and people and still get where they are needed most. Neither is waste. Neither is glamour. They are different scales of the same promise. Aircraft can make more trips at the cost of maintenance and fuel, but there is a point at which the fleet begins to eat tomorrow to feed today. Upstream comes the quiet proof that numbers rule the tale, a day that asks for what a runway cannot grant without stealing from the weak. Rails, when alive, will bear heavier sums with less risk, but rails cannot be wished alive when the yard that gives them shape is slow. Dependence on prior sorting is where myth meets arithmetic. Loads that arrive mismatch cost cycles, and cycles thrown away cannot be recovered by boldness. A marshalling error upstream becomes a ground crew shuffling boxes while an engine drinks fuel, and the clock looks on. An empty slot hides in every story that celebrates a single airplane doing the work of a train. The celebration is heartfelt. The gap is still there. This is not to scold flying. It is to place it correctly, with respect. Pilots and loaders are doing a hard job well inside a frame they did not build. The yard upstream is doing a hard job too, inside weather and fire. Logistics are not heroes or villains. They are limits. Accepting limits is not defeatism, it is clarity. Clarity lets you spend minutes where they buy the most. Picture a day that goes as well as it can. The yard catches a missed hose early, frees a tongue before noon, stacks a clean set for the apron by 1. The road holds, the trucks arrive in sequence. 3 aircraft rise heavy with what was needed first, and their lift buys quiet on a line that deserved a rest. Now picture the next day. The same people do the same careful work, but the freeze is sharper. The first cut arrives late. A 4th. Aircraft circles, hopeful and leaves with room. No one failed. The chain just moved at its slowest pace. Air can hurry a small part of the day and save something that would otherwise be lost, but it cannot replace iron. The yard decides how much flies by deciding how much reaches the apron ready on time. The better the handoff, the more the sky can help. When the handoff is slow, the sky shows patience and the ledger shows less. Upstream, to people who persuade frozen steel into paths that move. Downstream, to people who lift in cold wind and bring what they can to a place that needs it. Between them lies a chain with a temperament. It is strong when every link keeps. It's minute and gentle when one link cannot. Neither end can shame the other into more than the day will allow. The story stays small and kind because that is the honest scale of most days in winter. A system made of hands, valves, wheels, lists, and weather will do what it can and no more. The lesson is quiet. Protect the nodes, honor the minutes, and let courage fly the part that truly belongs to the sky. Steel tastes like nothing until it becomes soup. The path from iron to broth is longer than any map shows, yet it can be traced without raising a voice. A wagon of flour reaches the yard in the pale hour afternoon. A switch tongue hesitates and asks for a bar and a minute. The minute becomes 5, because ice likes company. 5 becomes 15 when a brake test needs a second listen. The wagon waits, not dramatically, but visibly to the man who chalks the board and trims a line to fit the new shape of the day. Coupler's close, and a small engine shoulders the wagon toward the spur that feeds the road gate. A truck should have met it before dusk. The truck left late because another set stole the earlier window. The gatekeeper notes the change with his pencil and offers a thin smile that means he understands. The light cools, and men work carefully because they always do. The wagon reaches the platform when lamps have started to matter. The sacks move with a soft thud that sounds like patience. A driver lifts his collar, signs for the load, and settles into a cab that smells of canvas and old tea. The road does not welcome speed. Ruts hold snow the sun never touches. A cart stalls at a narrow crossing and must be eased aside, and 10 minutes pay for courtesy. At the last turn, a soldier waves the truck through and warns of ice on the ramp. The truck answers with a low gear and arrives with its breath shallow. The kitchen has been watching the lane since mid-afternoon. Bowls are stacked, lids beaded with a little water from the steam that was hoped for and did not come. Portioning begins as arithmetic with a warm hand. How much to keep for the men who will come late from the line? How much to ladle first so the waiting does not punish the patient? The cook has his own ledger, written in spoons. He has learned the feeling of nearly enough and almost not. Tonight, I almost won. The pot is thin to touch, so everyone is seen, and a promise is made to thicken tomorrow when the flour surely comes earlier. Promises help sleep, even when the clock does not agree. How does steel taste when it becomes soup? It tastes like a watered edge that still warms, like calories counted instead of served. If a minute sticks to a switch, does it stick to a spoon? It does, invisibly, as a memory of what the bowl was last week. Men notice quietly. The talk does not turn sharp, and a joke lands softer. A letter is folded and kept for a better mood. Endurance is not only muscle. It is expected that meals will return a little strength. No outrage is required to see the link. Logistics is the cause. Appetite is the effect. The yard never sees the bowl, but the bowl tastes the yard. The next day, the wagon comes earlier and the soup thickens by a finger. Spirits lift the way, breath lifts after a hill. Then, winter takes another minute, and the minute becomes 5. Again, delayed diet is the phrase no one says aloud but everyone understands. It is not starvation. It is a long trimming of the day's edge until the day fits too closely. Somewhere a switch point keeps its frost a shade longer, and that shade becomes the color of evening in a kitchen that wanted more. A quarter loaf is saved for a man still out in the snow. The cook sets it aside and feels its lightness as if it were a message. He does not blame the yard. He knows the yard is a throat breathing as best it can. He writes a small note for morning deliveries and ties it with twine to a crate. The driver finds the note before dawn and tucks it in his pocket next to a photograph. He waits in the cab while the wagon he needs takes its time arriving, because winter has rules and they are being kept. By noon, the bowls will be better, not because anyone shouted, but because minutes found their path. And if they do not, the men will eat what there is and keep their quiet plans for the day when the spoon feels heavier again. Steel became soup, by way of chalk, couplers, and an honest road. The taste is memory, and the memory is patience, and patience is the spice that does not run out in a long season. The cook whispers tomorrow under his breath and trusts daylight to return a few minutes to the pot. Just a few. Cargo moves on hooves and rubber, and winter answers each with a different grammar. A truck breathes through fuel and parts, a horse. Through fodder and rest. Both carry less when the day is cold and long, and both ask for tomorrow even as they pay for today. We follow them side by side to see how a timetable becomes a loop. A truck leaves the yard with flour and returns with ruts clinging to its fenders. Cold thickens the oil and nudges a small leak into a real one. A fitter will meet it in the evening with a lamp and a wrench. The driver keeps to second gear longer than he would in spring, careful of ice under the pale crust, and he spends minutes he will not get back. The horse team leaves a depot with shells packed well forward and noses white with breath. Hooves find purchase where tires might slide, but the animals need pauses that feel kind and necessary rather than quick. When a loop closes, what cuts it open again? Fuel for the truck, fodder for the horses, parts for both, and a small permission in the day to do the upkeep before it grows into repair. How many deliveries buy tomorrow's strength? Enough to feed the machine that makes the next ones, and then a little more to build a margin. Margins are winter's preferred prey. Maintenance. Cycles in cold demand humility. A truck asks for grease that will move at 10 below, for belts that do not crack, for batteries warmed by blankets that steal coal from somewhere else. A horse asks for dry bedding, for hooves cleaned of ice stones, for a blanket that keeps the back from stiffening. Each minute of care costs a minute of motion. Skip the care, and tomorrow costs hours. Drivers learn to hear trouble early. A whine under load, a smell that hints at a slipping belt, a brake that grabs just so. Teamsters learn the signs too. Head carried lower, a hoof set down a beat late, a steam that fades too fast in the wind. Today's weather takes a delivery from 3 to 2, and the lost run takes calories from cooks and hay from stables, and that shortage returns in the morning as slower hands and slower steps. Reduced trips become reduced sustainment. Reduced sustainment becomes reduced trips. The loop draws itself. A simple diagram could show it. Today's shortfall, lowering tomorrow's capacity lowering the number of deliveries, the deliveries lowering the stores, and the stores lowering the strength to deliver. What cuts in is relief from outside the circle. A wagon of coal early, a shipment of fodder caught before the drift, a mechanic freed from the ladder to visit a coughing engine. Until then, the loop tightens the way a scarf tightens in a stiff wind. Horse versus truck is not a contest, but a set of trade-offs. Horses handle ground a truck fears, and they fail slowly, asking first and quitting later, but they eat every day even when they do not move. Trucks carry larger loads when roads are open, and they fail quickly, either fine or broken. But they do not consume when parked, at least not raw calories. Winter makes both temperaments expensive. Fuel shipments delayed by the yard mean trucks. Idle, less, and still grow late. Hay delayed by the same slowness means teams returning thinner and needing longer rests. The day after that, the returns begin. A truck that missed its maintenance window goes down for a full day, and 2 smaller runs try to cover its range and cannot. A team that missed its full ration pulls short and stands shivering, and a second team spends its strength to finish the journey, leaving tomorrow already trimmed. Some problems wear uniforms. These wear wool and canvas. Drivers share a spanner and a small bottle of spirit to clean a frozen jet. Teamsters share a brick warmed at the stove to ease a stiff bit. None of this is drama. It is the care that keeps a link from snapping. The yard's slowness is not a single event. It is a circle tightening out where wheels and hooves matter. Inside the fence, the board shows departures late. Outside, the roads answer with fewer returns. The fewer returns bring fewer calories to animals and men, and the thinner men walk slower on the next shift, and the shift's end finds another repair undone. By dusk, the question is not whether the day won, but whether tomorrow still has. Enough hands, enough hooves, enough spark to pretend it can be normal. Relief enters where it must be invited. Into tanks, into mangers, into the shed where a mechanic straightens a bent rod and smiles at the sound a bearing makes when it remembers how to turn. New input breaks the knot only when it arrives early and is spent wisely. Together, people adapt because they must, and the shape of the day adapts with them. The yard writes leaner plans that fit inside the light, and units learn to read those plans without hope for a sudden windfall. On time shrinks. From a broad promise to a narrow appointment, the timetable stops dreaming and starts measuring. What once felt like a crisis becomes a routine. Then it becomes background, a low hum at the edge of every choice. Reports change tone first. Numbers are still honest, but adjectives soften, as if politeness could persuade iron to behave. Departed, fewer. Received, adequate, issues, weather, and repairs. The sentences say less and mean more. Quiet acceptance grows like frost along a fence. The plan for morning starts with what is certain and leaves blank space where boldness used to live. Crews arrive with their own pencils and fill those spaces cautiously as the sun proves which switches will behave and which will sulk. Shrinking safety buffers hide in ordinary words like meanwhile and later. Meanwhile no longer means at the same time. It means if time allows. Later no longer means today. It means a better window that might be tomorrow. How small can it become before it isn't? Each shift answers on behalf of the next. The board shows 3 moves where 5 once fit, and no one asks for the missing 2 because they know where they went. They went into testing, into careful repairs, into detours that kept hands whole. Hidden brittleness gathers under the surface calm, the way ice gathers under a dusting of powder. At a distance, the yard looks steady. Up close, you can hear it creak when a plan leans too hard on one throat. Units adjust their expectations with the same patience. Rations are planned to the spoon, fuel to the liter, batteries to the hour. A march begins a little later so the road can harden. A return is accepted a little earlier so trucks can be nursed back to sheds. Sleep is scheduled with the care once given to parades. Morale is not joy. It is commitment to the ordinary under pressure. When does a shortage stop feeling like a shortage? When the complaint dries up and the work continues, and the joke at dusk mentions neither soup nor shells. The new normal has rites and phrases. Hold a moment, wait for the guest, test again, walk it once more. They keep people safe and spend minutes doing it. This normally narrows the chance of bold gains, but it also narrows the chance of sudden loss. The price is time, and time is already dear. Command learns the new dialect and writes orders that respect it. Priority still exists, but it is shaped like a cue rather than a shout. Paper speaks more softly. Ammunition today, fuel first light tomorrow, food in the warmer hour if roads behave. The yard replies in the same key, marking boxes on its diagram where risk is low and leaving the rest for later verification. Maps lose their bright arrows and gain small dots that mean tested, trusted, used again, a soft turn toward the endgame. Begins when everyone privately admits the schedule cannot stretch any further without something breaking that cannot be replaced. You can feel it in the way a foreman speaks about tools, and in the way a driver thanks the mechanic after a small fix works the first time. The compliments are not decoration. They are a recognition that margin now lives in people, not in iron. In that recognition lies both safety and danger. Safety, because people can be careful. Danger, because people get tired and proud and noble people will try to carry a day the machinery cannot. The yard's best defense against that temptation is its own honesty. It posts the real numbers and refuses to promise more than the hour will accept. And it repeats this calm refusal until the habit is shared. From the outside, the crisis looks gone. Inside, the glass still fogs when someone opens the office door and the lamp trembles in the draft. The background hum is the sound of effort meeting boundaries, again and again, without complaint. Men still find satisfaction. A switch that slides on the first pull, a hose that seals at once, a departure that lands exactly in the gap it was meant to land in. They carry those small wins home like heat in their gloves. What felt like an emergency has learned to fit inside the day's shape until the day cannot hold it anymore. The sign will not be thunder. It will be a graph that refuses to cross back, a queue that does not dissolve overnight, a set of promised deliveries that slip 2 days in a row. When that arrives, everyone will already know because they have been living close to it for weeks. Reports still arrive on time, but they promise less, and the men read them like weather, not law. A day that holds together earns quiet praise. A day that slips is folded into memory and used as instruction for gentler pacing tomorrow. Everyone feels the edge. You do not hear a line being crossed. You feel a schedule lean and never quite straighten. The graph is simple enough to live in a tired head. Arrivals holding steady, throughput flattening in winter light, backlog rising like a slow tide against sleepers. One day the tide is background. The next, it licks the bottom rung of every plan. How do you hear a line being crossed? You hear pencils stop erasing and begin circling. The board still fills, but each correction pushes a little later, and the later becomes the new place to aim. Crews do the same safe checks, but the windows they depend on are thinner. Light is counted in handfuls. Coal is poured with the caution of a ration. Damage removes one option, then two. Weather takes the third. The day begins with hope and ends with arithmetic. We can name the day because the ledger remembers. Arrivals met their mark. Processed wagons met yesterday's average, not yesterday's ambition. A ladder under watch, stayed under watch. A siding written off, stayed written off. The queue that should have softened by dusk stood unchanged. From then on, even good news arrived late, because late sat inside every handoff. A repair finished. On time, but the light was gone to use it. The train made up the distance, but met a yard that had already spent its minutes proving a fragile switch. Tomorrow could not pay today's debt without borrowing from the next day's safety. If tomorrow can't pay today's debt, what happens Wednesday? The answer is simple and stern. Wednesday pays with something it cannot spare. Plot the picture in calm ink. Arrivals steady. Processed flat. Backlog rising. The distance between what comes and what moves is negative float. The time a plan wants that the day does not hold. Gentle words for a hard truth. Negative float means a promise must slide, or another promise must be taken apart. Ad hoc heroics offer sprint, where structure demands capacity. A crew can push through dinner. A locomotive can run one more loop. A foreman can accept a risk he would refuse in summer. None of that closes the slope. It only throws sparks against snow. The chart ignores effort and listens to totals. A week. Later, the line that should have bent back has not. It has learned a steeper habit. We let the graph sit because it tells the truth without glares. The slope is the story. Once backlog rises faster than the yard can push it down, every later. Day begins lower. Repairs consume windows that sorting needs. Sorting consumes fuel that repairs need. The board gains more arrows than boxes, then more notes than arrows. Men work with care and still lose ground. Their care is why they do not lose faster. This is not failure of will. It is arithmetic, reaching the point beyond which recovery needs. Outside help. Coal early, engines spare, a clear week without interruptions. Gifts the yard cannot conjure. The moment it could not keep up is a kindness to name, not a shame. It allows sense to replace yearning. It says the chain will now move at its slowest link until relief enters. It prepares the mind for outcomes already written in the slope. It sets the final chapter in motion, not with a crash, but with a quiet recognition. Even good days will feel late, and great days will feel merely adequate, and adequate will feel rare. From here, the plan must measure, not wish, must protect people, not chase numbers, must land softly the truths the chart has already drawn. The hand steadies the chalk, draws one more box around the backlog line, and accepts that tomorrow begins. Already spoken aloud. You can hear a surrender on a timetable board long before you hear it in a square. It sounds like lines that no longer connect, like departures that keep their manners but lose their certainty. Like a clerk who writes smaller to fit less promise into the same space. We avoid sharp pictures and listen to numbers, insufficient tonnage, missed windows, thinned rations, cold workshops, tired crews. The end arrives not as a blow, but as the end of a schedule that can no longer be written. When the last chalk line fades, what is left to plan? The answer is care. Care of people, care of paper, care of what must be handed over without bitterness. The final day's throughput picture is plain. Trains still arrive because rails beyond the yard still breathe. Processed wagons fall short, by the same gap the graph has taught us to expect. Attempts to surge meet the narrow throat and slow into queues that do not dissolve by morning. Depots take what they can and learn to ask for less. Kitchens write menus that assume late. The math is not angry. It is tired and final. Administrative signs of collapse carry a quiet dignity. Forms add new lines for shortages that used to be exceptions. Reports arrive on time but shrink in ambition. The phrase subject to availability becomes a constant refrain. The office window fogs whenever the door opens. The map on the wall sheds its bright arrows for modest circles that mean safe for now. A foreman who once promised noon now says after light and means be patient. The clerk replaces a blunt stub with a sharper stick of chalk and writes fewer words with greater care. The linkage remains intact, even as it thins. Yard to depots to units still reads as cause to effect, but the numbers between are small. A kitchen receives less and spreads more. A unit steps off later and steps back earlier. We keep our tone respectful around prisoners and civilians because their days depend on these same lines. Paper carries their fates gently, counts, exchanges, routes agreed upon, and promises to meet at a place left untouched if possible. The yard measures time left with the same attention it once measured capacity. Fewer wagons sorted, still means wagons sorted. Fewer departures still means departures. The dignity lies in finishing what can be finished without drama. A surrender by arithmetic is not a legal act here. It is a practical one. The day no longer contains enough minutes to keep the front fed and warm. The yard did not decide the terms, but it counted down the hours to them. We do not need to watch uniforms on a staircase to understand the meaning. We can look at the board at dusk. Arrivals stand in a neat column. Processed stands shorter. Backlog stands tallest. The hand that once drew arrows now draws a box around. What must wait for a sun that will not buy the time required? When the last chalk line fades, plan becomes record. Record becomes receipt. Receipt becomes memory. Acceptance does not mean indifference. It means speaking softly about facts. Fewer trucks will leave after dark. Coal will be reserved for the pumps and the stove in the crew room. A battery will expect 2 shells where it asked for 4. A kitchen will pour thinner and keep a heel of bread for someone who will arrive late. The last duty of the board is to avoid promises that would put brave people in harm's way for nothing. Respect at the end is the clean line that says what can still be done, and the blank beneath it that no one pretends to fill. Stay gentle. Lessons arrive quietly when numbers have finished speaking. A campaign is often a sum of small processes, done on time. A switching yard looks humble, but it is not small. It is a hand that sets the pace of a day. Winter, damage, and limited options turned 1 yard into a slow hand closing. We can leave with a calm framework that fits in a pocket. Count minutes, track handoffs, protect nodes, respect limits. No blame, no easy answers, only clarity earned in quiet. Begin with minutes. Every movement has a cost in time, and time is the only currency that never returns. The habit of counting minutes is not cruelty, it is care. It keeps risk honest and promises modest. If 10 minutes repeat 100 times, a bowl becomes thinner and a battery grows silent. Flexibility is a kind of stored kindness. It lives in spare track, spare time, spare fuel. A minute saved at the switch becomes 10 saved at the gate. Small economies compound into quieter evenings, then handoffs. The chain matters more than any single link's pride. Rail to yard to road to apron to aircraft is one story. Rail to yard to spur to kitchen is another. In both, the slowest point. Sets the day's length, protect the handoff places, give them warmth, clear diagrams, spare parts, and honest windows of light. Where hands meet, confusion steals time. Clear labels and simple sequences are worth more than slogans. Protect nodes. A yard is not an address. It is a set of choices alive in space and time. Redundancy is patience made into steel. A crossover. Saved from neglect is a minute saved for 100 wagons. A siding kept open by steady maintenance is a promise kept many times. When maps lose lines, minutes flow the long way. Protect the lines that keep minutes short. A second route is not luxury. It is insurance against weather and chance. Redundancy carries tomorrow on its shoulders. Respect limits. Limits are not insults, they are guardrails. A frozen switch is not an enemy, it is a fact that needs tools, heat, and time. An airlift is not a replacement for rails, it is a bridge between honest capacities. Pride that pretends otherwise spends people and promises for little gain. Clarity that names the limit lets you spend minutes where they buy the most safety and the most effect. Limits stated early, let everyone aim their energy where it can actually move weight truly. Treat paper as instrument, not illusion. Orders should speak the same language as daylight and coal. Priority sets are useful when they acknowledge the throat and the season. Ammunition in this window, food in that one, fuel where pumps can keep the line alive. A plan that matches physics is comfort on a cold morning. Credit ordinary workers. Their caution saved more than any speech. When you design for next time, design for their hands. Place warm brakes near cold tasks. Put the spare hose where someone can find it in the dark.